In my fourth and final anniversary address after 4 years as your president, I want to celebrate the Society's achievements in the context of debates about the future of our key heritage institutions and the assumptions behind those, and indeed debates about regionalism, about nationalism, given that we in this society have played a key role for 3 centuries in crafting the cultural and intellectual background to those things throughout Britain. Many places that we belong to, we share with other identities that we have. We can be one thing under one hat and something somewhere else. The loyalties we have to various places, to institutions, to nations, to parts of the country, may also be constantly shifting. Those thoughts we might have about our roles in our professional, academic and personal lives are very important ones, and they're the sorts of things that when we go out from this society, as many of us do across Europe and the wider world, sharing our knowledge and learning from other countries, we've made the sort of values that we hold dear in the society valuable to other people. In December 1707, 3 men gathered at the Bear in the Strand and formed the nucleus of what was to become the present Society of Antiquaries. 23 fellows, the earliest fellows, then gathered together 10 years later, of course, at the Mitre Tavern in Fleet Street in July 1717, and thereafter the minutes of the Society were constantly kept. And of course we gained our Royal Charter in 1751. I start with these individuals, famous as it were to fellows, because I feel between them the range of their scholarship, their interests, their professional lives cover so much of what we've subsequently become as a society. From the left then, Humphrey Wanley, the portrait on the first landing of our stairs, paleographer, a great scholar of Anglo-Saxon, and of course, in terms of our national collections, crucially the librarian to Sir Robert Harley, without whose collections many of our national collections would not be in place. I've always thought of Wanley as someone fancying himself here as St. Jerome, this idea of somebody who knows so many texts so well that he can compare versions and knows the differences between them. He's holding, of course, a facsimile of the Coddle Gospel, where the Gospel of St. Matthew is written in Greek. In the middle is John Bagford, who very much more represents, I think, something of the amateur tradition in antiquarian study. A man who died in relative poverty, trader in books, working between great scholars of his day, but a formidable scholar himself, and very interested in reaching towards a history of printing, and very much taking us forward to modern times, if any of these people comes closest to the sorts of concerns we've developed in the 20th century about retrieving vital and keeping a record of popular culture. Then Bagford was the man, because he was also very keen on collecting ballads and transcribing them for the future. And on the right, of course, in some ways nearest to my own heart in terms of scholastic endeavour, John Townend there on the right of that pair with his father, the famous architect William Townend, the detail of a painting in the National Portrait Gallery. John, of course, the first director of the Society, and when I look back, when I was appointed director 7 years ago, at that list of directors, there was nobody I was more thrilled to be succeeding than this man. Not himself an architect, as his father was, but a collector, and of course a recorder of great things. His travels across the continent, particularly to Italy, recording buildings, inscriptions, monuments, leaving us a tremendous record of his work. What these 3 men all shared was a belief in the efficacy of the paper record to keep that record of our past together, whether it was in manuscripts or in print, or in John Townlend's case by drawing the things he saw, things of the remote and the recent past. 1707, when these three men met, of course, is a historic moment and a particular resonance for us this year, because, of course, it marked the Act of Union. But also, it was a time of deep divisions, which many people would have argued were really very much part of the background of the making of that union, a political compromise between opposites. The divisions between the people supporting the Act of Settlement and the Jacobites, and of course the other shadow over that was itself the division between Protestant and Catholic. And of course John Townlend was very much part of that divide, because he was himself a covert and eventually open Catholic. And this great drawing, which we hold in our collections amongst our many wonderful drawings, his Turris Fortissima, characterised by John Harris no less as, and I quote, "nothing like it in the history of Baroque architecture in England, or indeed perhaps anywhere in Europe." But knowing John, as many of us do, I think that's the sort of thing he would say, just to wake us up to how extraordinary this drawing is. And by Peter Davidson, who describes it as Townlend's dream of a restored Catholic regime in these islands, the generation of new readings of antiquity, north and south. Both those descriptions come from the book edited by Cinzia Seeker on John Townlend, which came out a few years ago. In that same year of 1707, someone who would certainly have become an antiquary and a fellow of the society had he lived, for he died in 1709, is Edward Lloyd, whose Archaeologia Britannica, giving some account of the languages, histories, and customs of the original inhabitants of Great Britain, from collections and observations in travels through Wales, Cornwall, Britannia, Ireland and Scotland, and not done at some personal cost to him. He was in fact imprisoned in Brest because, of course, he was doing these travels 1700, 1701 in the run-up to the War of the Spanish Succession. Lloyd was born in Shropshire. He was responsible for the new notes on in the Welsh sections of the new edition that was published of Camden's Britannia in his lifetime. And of course he was keeper of the Ashmolean Museum from 1690 until his death in 1709. This is a scholar of many things, of fossils and stones, of languages. In fact, many people have ascribed to him the origins of the word and the modern meanings of the word Celtic in our language. And indeed, on the bottom left there, the Lloydia serratina, the Snowdon lily, found in alpine regions in many parts of the world, but now apparently endangered in Wales itself, and there are plans to replant it in Scotland to keep its survival within these islands. So a good move there to do something across the country using our resources. Lloyd, and here's a warning to us all, something I was thinking about today, moving around the basements and inner recesses of these buildings. He died in his ground floor room at the Ashmolean Museum at the age of 49, some age at that time, with debts of £78. Not all these scholars, obviously, did well professionally or were known and celebrated at all times in their life in the world of London and of books. But he's much celebrated now. In 2009, there was an exhibition on him in the National Library of Wales, and a conference at Aberystwyth, which is a great resource now, the record of that conference, for our knowledge of him. But one of the things that came out about his work and the publication in 1707 has been something of a debate about the politics of how Lloyd wrote this book and brought it together about Britain at the time of the Act of Union. How political was that to stress something of the way the nation fitted together under this new regime? Our fellow Nancy Edwards, in a very extraordinary, I think, article that she published in our journal in 2007, quarrels somewhat, or rather challenges somewhat, the idea that this was a Hobsbawmian sort of invention of tradition, but that the work of Lloyd in doing this was a genuine attempt to chart and document things which in the 300 years since, of course, have changed, have mutated, and now Acker the Lily is under threat again. So these national and regional debates, what belongs to whom? Where should things be placed? Why are things in the places there are? To introduce one particular debate that's been hot in the news and rather appropriate to one of the medals I'll be giving out today, the burial of our kings, our medieval kings. On the left, King John at Worcester and Henry IV at Canterbury, buried in the places where they made endowments to religious foundations and places where they specially asked to be buried. In John's case, of course, he died at Newark and his body was taken across country for burial at Worcester. But on the right, two kings who died who were buried, rather, in a sense where they fell, in rather different ways, of course, but let's say they fell. Rufus at Winchester, the stone there in the New Forest, taken to the cathedral at Winchester, and of course Edward II, who died at Berkeley Castle and is buried at Gloucester. This dichotomy between the wish of somebody to be buried somewhere and the competing claims there might have been from their religious or other endowments as to where they wish to be, and you can all see where this is leading. I'm reproducing, it's very much de trop because these two pictures are in this room. Of course, our two images of Richard III, 16th century images, but very, very important to us in retaining traditions and much discussion about the origins of these likenesses. Richard III, of course, and the debate that's going on now, I saw just a few weeks ago about another challenge by York on Leicester, but this debate about where he should be buried is something about claiming here on a regional basis of where this king, now his remains have been found, should be placed. This, I think, is a very interesting debate about belonging and reflects in the debate going on just that parallel back in medieval times of the different burial of kings about which I was speaking. And in definitions of the national and who we are and what we do, something else I think that relates very much to things that have gone on in this society. One of my heroes, and again because it's very much related to architectural history and the record we have within these walls of great objects, great buildings, John Carter here, hard at work. And of course it is John Carter who was the Society's antiquarian recorder and contributed so much to Vetusta Monumenta, who went around the country and in particular recorded for us our great cathedrals. This is Durham, of course, which did reach the stage of engraving, but we only have the drawings for Wells because they were never made into engravings. These great representations of our great cathedrals are terribly important, dating as they do from the 1790s and 1800s, because Carter, as you know, was not averse to making trouble for himself. He was barred eventually from Durham because of his criticism of the way the cathedral was being restored. He was a great champion of the Gothic, and of course, because of the work that he did, enabled that national picture of the medieval to develop, which really laid the ground for 19th century revivalism and the Gothic revival, giving names to particular periods. And of course, now we use those and very much see them in the parallels they have with developments on the continent, and particularly northern France. The making of records which give us names and which tell us a national story about the things we believe in and the things that we still say, in his case, are our greatest building achievements, those great medieval works. One other thing in this triad of things about things that we've got that tell us things about the national story is the Great Bronze Age shield from 1300 to 1100 BC. One of a group found at Beath in Ayrshire in probably 1779 or in one of the years thereafter. It's the only one of that group to survive. We don't know what happened to the rest of them. And one of the objects here that I've grown to admire, understand, starting from the very moving talk on this that our General Secretary John Lewis gave in the many tours we did around the exhibition in America for a variety of audiences, and subsequently talking to people teaching metal conservation at Westdean College. I've come to understand this much more, understand its history and the changing view of what it all means as something that was clearly buried as part of a burial ritual and deliberately scarred as part of that ceremony. But the point I want to make is that though it's the only one to survive from the group found at Beath, there are about 20 of these discovered from this Bronze Age period across Britain and Ireland, and there are more like them, of course, in Denmark and Scandinavia. And therefore, I think one of the great messages I will take away from having done this job for the Society, and as I've listened and in my poor way tried to prompt questions and respond to the many lectures I've heard in this room, is that when people talk about not just these islands off the northwest coast of Europe, but other areas of the world, when you step back in time, you are talking about cultural groupings that don't respect modern national boundaries, whether here in these islands or indeed in the post-Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1918 in the Middle East. No, the cultural links between countries are about the sea and about rivers, and cut across all those boundaries, defining cultural regions, really have nothing to do with our modern sense of nationalism, but actually suggest all kinds of new and exciting ways in which people once came together across those boundaries. To what do people feel a sense of belonging when it comes to their national or regional identity? One of the pleasures I've had in these 4 years is going around to a good number of regional archaeological societies, local archaeological societies, to celebrate anniversaries, most particularly in the last year or two, the 150th anniversary of the Hampshire Field Club at Winchester, to the Yorkshire Archaeological Society at Leeds, where I talked last autumn, and close to home, as many of you know, I live in Brighton and work at the University of Sussex, to the 150th anniversary of the Sussex Archaeological Collections, where we gathered, in that image on the right there, at Michelham Priory some months ago to celebrate that occasion. What's interesting about all that is that there's the Sussex Archaeological Society, one of the largest, proudest, biggest of all our county archaeological societies, when they did a trawl of how many local history societies are there in Sussex, they came up with nearly 100 names. They're all active, and in fact, of course, what they discovered in terms of footfall through properties, people attending meetings, and of course, as with many people in this room, we wear hats under many of these different organisations, is that people are principally loyal to their local history society. They do that rather than necessarily come to Lewes or take part in the activities of the Central Archaeological Society. That tells us a lot, I think, particularly with the modern media we have to hand, the way we can encourage people to record their local history, about the resource there is at a local level. That's one of the things that came out very strongly from the two-day heritage debate we had here last autumn, where people were giving us information about what they'd achieved through those very, very local networks. So, one hopes that the great county societies will flourish, and I put alongside it the great Barbican, of course, at Lewes Castle. Next to it, just along the road, of course, is the headquarters in Barbican House of the Sussex Archaeological Society, but that we do have a challenge of also knowing that we have to keep rethinking that map of where people want to put their time and energies when it comes to doing local history. How has the Society of Antiquaries intervened and collaborated and facilitated in recent years? On a European scale, a few years ago, we entertained in this building the General Secretaries, in a couple of cases, I think, Vice Presidents of European antiquarian societies, all younger than us, many of them Napoleonic, many of them very keenly getting back together after the gap between 1945 and 90, those countries of Eastern Europe. Last September, we had the 2 days here in collaboration with English Heritage and the National Trust, as our General Secretary reported earlier today in the Fellows meeting, on the future of the heritage in this country. And of course, that leads me to what is still prominent there on our website. I hope it's still prominent after the big changes we've made today in updating the website. Our response to the proposal for the future of English heritage, which we all must have a voice in thinking about. Also, as the General Secretary said earlier, we are in a unique position. All the other chief responses to this initiative by government to do things with English heritage are, to some extent, funded by the same sources. We are an independent organisation. That doesn't mean to say that all those responses are valued, but of course we do have that independent voice, and that's a very important one, no matter where we're coming from or how we arrive at that position. We can do nothing but wish our colleagues in the English heritage of the future, as we have in the recent difficult past, both admired the way they've tackled funding issues and will face the future under a different organisational structure. We look forward, however, to seeing more of the business plan of how English heritage goes forward under its Historic England plans, and the way it's going to measure its visitor reaction to new things that will be taking place. We all have issues and wish them well with the long-term prospects. Things look good in the short term, repair of buildings, keeping things together, but I think we are all concerned about sites like this. Here we're at Titchfield Abbey in Hampshire, and our concerns that we've raised publicly about using this word collection, because whilst we can all see that it's very apposite to make sure that members of government, indeed anybody who's got power to wield, understand that these are a gathering of things like our great collections in the national museums. Nevertheless, two things. First of all, that sense that, of course, it isn't just the buildings, it's the surroundings, it's the archaeology, it's the landscape around, which are also very important. Some or all, or in some cases none of which, are under the control of English heritage. And also because this collection was sometimes an instantaneous reaction to vulnerable sites, sometimes a very carefully planned saving of them. But they are sites which really complement things held by the National Trust and other bodies in terms of the preponderance amongst them of these very vulnerable castle, former monastic sites, which are going to be a great challenge for the new organisation to maintain under new arrangements. And of course, as I said at the beginning, we wish them well with that, and we're here to help them, to challenge them, and to monitor, I hope, what's going on. You will also find on the website our response to the proposals for local government archaeological services. In that area too, we have many concerns about the future, about the erosion of certain things that have happened in recent times, and what's going to happen in the years to come. We've also, of course, been very active in our support for trying to bring people together from different hats, to the point where last time we had some difficulties with some of the organisations who were reluctant to be in the same room with other organisations, is about parish churches. We had our conference on piety and peril, where we looked at the fabric of parish churches. This coming Friday, we have our half-day on present issues with their contents and the threats to those, led by our fellows Lloyd Grossman, Chair of Heritage Alliance, and John Goodall, our eminent architectural historian and architectural editor of Country Life. And it was therefore very absolute. I first saw it in Salon, which tells us everything that we need to know right now about what's happening in heritage. That the recent judgment about the piece of armour from the Wootton St Lawrence, from the Church of Wootton St Lawrence, and the fact that it is now a challenge whether that can be sold, is very good news, because it puts a brake on those appurtenances, those things in churches which we all care about it. In addition, of course, our national contribution is about contributions to research, to big research projects, 3 that came off the current site. On the top left, the Anglo-Saxon and Viking site at Torksey, some finds from there. Below that, our support for the Gallo-Roman quern industry in Seine-Maritime. And on the right, the submerged archaeology of Neolithic Orkney. And as Caroline Wickham-Jones of the University of Aberdeen, our fellow, says on the site, that what our sum of money enabled them to do was to explore a completely new area of Orkney for the archaeological remains. The point about this is we don't have the vast resources to support huge projects per se. What we do is we come in with sums of money which hopefully prompt other organisations to give support. And of course, in some instances, we can also support particular aspects of a particular archaeological project or the restoration of a particular site. Sometimes we give help to the conservation of specific things. Sometimes it's about the landscape. The pillar at Elysee in Wales, near Llangollen, erected by the ruler of the Kingdom of Powys in memory of his great-grandfather in the 9th century. What we did there was enable a survey to be done of the ground around it to know more about the archaeology, whilst others paid for the conservation of the pillar itself. The sort of things that we do up and down the country that tell people what we're able to do, what we support, what we believe in. And of course, through the William Maurice Fund for Historic Churches, and some of, as with many of our committees, many members of that are here today, I'm always very appreciative, have always been very appreciative of the enormous amount of work that particular committee does to investigate the churches coming forward for help. Through the William Morris Fund, we preserve and consolidate not the buildings themselves, but the fittings and furnishings of historic churches. And this has been, I think, a very crucial thing, because here again we are often giving quite small sums of money, some hundreds or maybe just up to £1,000, but often making the difference. And we've helped conserve stained glass, coats of arms, coat chests, ironwork, all kinds of things within that broad area that our French colleagues would call the seconde œuvre of the church, as well as some of the things later put inside it. And I show you just two examples which say rather different things. On the top left, the most famous of those, that group of monuments in the church at Wing in Buckinghamshire to the Dormer family, the mid-16th century, now needing a lot of care and attention. And on the right, the church of Framilode in Gloucestershire, where what you're looking at here is a rather beautiful third quarter of the 19th century church. Those commandment panels in the apse there are tin plate, recording a local industry that has now vanished. So paying as we did for the conservation of those in an overall conservation of the apse end of the church was a particular way of giving support to the memory of something which was very important in the local community. Sometimes our work is simply to move things to a more appropriate part of the church. We've helped put back many fonts to their original position. We've taken things off floors when they have to go on walls because of the wear and tear. And in this case, at the church of Inverhaven, up in Murrayshire, formerly Banff, the 6th to 8th century Pictish stones have been moved from their place on the south wall, as you see at the left top there, to a more secure place in the porch. And they've been conserved, suitable wall panels have been placed up to explain them. Here again, our contribution, one of many, towards this particular moment of making sure these key things for the history of this part of Scotland are conserved in a way that will last for many generations to come. And I wanted to end today on Kelmscott, which we celebrate, I hope, continually, because this is the place that the Society is proud to be responsible for, that we have done great work in recent years to open to the public in more accessible ways, and we almost reached a target visitor number of 20,000 last year. And the way that we have spread our wings out from the house itself to think more about the estate, about the outbuildings, about the place of the house within the village. None of this could have been done without the great contribution of the staff at Kelmscott and, of course, the volunteers there, and indeed the staff here in Burlington House, who have led ways of helping people on site to manage that property. It's been the recipient of a recent Gold Award for local tourism, and again, as the General Secretary prefigured today in his address to the Fellows, the recent appointment of an artist in residence, and that's the reason why I put up those lower two images, because on the left there, Kelmscott has long inspired works of art, what our colleagues at the V&A would call flat art. I learned that from working alongside Michael Snowdon on the Ornament Gallery 20 years ago. But also, Kelmscott is also a place about the craft and making of art on all surfaces and in many different materials, and that's the reason for putting up the image of William's bed there, which of course was lent recently, the first time it's ever left the house, to take Britain for their great Pre-Raphaelite show in recent times. And the artist in residence, supported as it is by fellows, by the Radcliffe Trust, the Company of Art Scholars, the Oxford University Research Centre in Humanities, means that we are, in these ways, collaborating with other institutions. And that's very much the way forward as we bring in research students here at Kelmscott. We now have students on placements from MAs working within these walls every summer. There are going to be 4 interns at Kelmscott this summer. Collaboration with universities and with other institutions and grant-giving bodies to make research on our objects, collections, and at Kelmscott, not just the house, but the landscape and its place within the landscape possible in the years to come. So those multiple identities that I've trawled through a little today, I hope that we are genuinely seen as a giving and receiving society. Historically, that's of course the case. If you look at those prints when we were in Somerset House in the late 18th century, in the great room there, you will see on the walls objects from the Royal Collection, which were lodged with us for a number of years at that time. Some of the most famous pictures at the time when the move to Buckingham Palace rather shuffled, as it were, the place of certain pictures within the Royal Collection's view of itself. And also the fact that, of course, for a year in the early 19th century, we housed the Rosetta Stone, not here in this building, but at Somerset House. It was in our care before it went back to the British Museum. I think things like that, things from royal collections, things that end up in the national collections, many of which have come through our rooms, whether at Somerset House or here since the 1870s, show the central role we have played in defining those objects of national history that we now treasure. And of course, as I've said from this podium many times, we have about 400 objects on permanent or semi-permanent loan up and down the country to museums and galleries where appropriate, including, of course, an object in the National Gallery and several in the British Museum. So that's our giving and receiving role, which I think is very important, alongside the regular loans we make to exhibitions, temporary exhibitions, of all kinds. But I've chosen to end rather than begin my address to you today and wishing the Society well for the future. I've left at the end the presentation of medals, because it did seem to me that it's really in summary of what I've been saying, what we've heard today, that is best exemplified by you, the Fellows, and these 4 people in particular, whom the Society is honouring today, for the breadth of their work and the kinds of things that they've been doing for us, and their particular achievements. I will begin by announcing the award of the Gold Medal for Archaeology to Beatrice de Coddle. This is given to Beatrice unashamedly and unreservedly in the year of a very special birthday for her, and we will be hosting a party for her on that day in June with the Council for British Archaeology. I can't begin to sum up in a few words Beatrice's distinguished career, and many of you, of course, will know, but her work, particularly on the archaeology of Baluchistan, as many reports one reads of her work, her beloved Baluchistan, and later her work in the Persian Gulf, has been very significant. The Council for British Archaeology lecture series in her honour, the latest of which was given by Michael Wood, is now 38 years old. That's a long time for any lecture series to be devoted to somebody, as it were, in contemporary life. the medals and honours which she has received from this country, the Burton Memorial Medal from the Royal Asiatic Society, but the many, many distinctions she has been given by the Middle East. And I think, in just coming to the end of what I want to say about Beatrice, I think that really shows in Beatrice's life and career the sorts of things that we would recognise as representative of some of the important things about our studies and the way those things get recognised, no matter what political situations tell us, no matter what differences of opinion there may be. Because as Beatrice moved across parts of the Middle East, as some areas maybe became too sensitive for her, it nevertheless meant that new regimes recognised her work by these honours and distinctions. Everywhere recognises that the telling of their history is very, very important. In most recent times, from the honours she's received from the government in Qatar, honouring her work there and in that area. So we'll be actually giving Beatrice the medal itself on her birthday because that seemed appropriate. But I want to say now to present Beatrice our deep respect and indeed affection and say congratulations on this medal, Beatrice. We're giving the Society's Medal to John Madison and Merlin Watterson, our fellows, for their extraordinary work on the Conservation Management Report, which came out in the spring of 2013 on Kelmscott Manor and its estate. They will be the first to acknowledge that this absorbed the work of several earlier scholars and assessors of the site. They had considerable foundations on which to build, as they did the expertise within the Society at the present time. But it is an amazing document. It's the first complete, comprehensive view we have of house, outbuildings, estate, and what we can do with them. It's already been highly influential in the way we're planning for the future of Kelmscott Manor. So, John and Merlin, we honour you today and thank you, and we'd like you to accept these medals. This is a special year for Pamela, fingers crossed, because we expect later this year to publish, at last, our catalogue of pictures. This is a task which Pamela embarked upon more than half a century ago. The bringing together of this great work in recent years was encouraged and supported by previous officers of the Society, and I will make a special mention of Eric Fernie during his time as president for doing that. And alongside Pamela, the scholarship, the deep scholarship of Bernard Nurse and Jill Franklin, who have helped her bring this catalogue together and have made highly individual and unique contributions to this great work. It's also going forward under the skilled editorship of Kate Owen and Christopher Catling, without whom this would never be reaching the stage we now hope it's going to reach. But that is something, and that's why we're doing this now, because that's this year. But I think it's very important to say, in some ways, that's the trigger of why we need to honour Pamela, because of all I've been saying today. Pamela's immense service to many learned societies, to cathedral fabric committees, to her foundation of the Harlexton Symposium on Medieval Studies, her own books and articles, television appearances over many years, have resulted in a range of work on that range of things that we as a society value and hope that people, by reading the range of our material across archaeology and the material culture of the past, art and architectural history, will see links and value these things in conjunction with another. Pamela has written on wall paintings, on figural sculpture, on panel paintings, on manuscripts, even some archaeology. Though, as art historians, we would have to say that, wouldn't we? Pamela, again, our deep respect and affection, and congratulations on the reception of the Society's medal.
I think we can't let this moment pass of Maurice's last lecture to us as president from that podium to say a few words about himself. And I'd just like to say, Maurice, your contribution to the work of the Society has been absolutely immense. You were elected a fellow 20 years ago in 1994. You then served as a member of its council in two key roles, as its director from 2007 to 2010, and as its president from 2010 to today. In these latter roles in particular, as you've already demonstrated in the lecture you've just given us, you've worked tirelessly to maximise the public-facing aspects of the Society's work. Despite your heavy workload at Sussex University, you've made yourself available for several key initiatives and have been unstinting with your time, your learning, your ability to engage with scholarly and lay audiences. In 2007, after we'd mounted the Society's exhibition, Making History, you lent your energies wholeheartedly to taking it round the country, ensuring that that exhibition, so much welcomed in London, was also toured through England up to 2010, and was also subsequently mounted, I think we've seen pictures of that too today, to considerable acclaim in the United States. You've also encouraged the Society to open up Kelmscott Manor to as wide a public as possible. And in so doing, you've personally engaged with volunteers, with the local community, as a thoughtful and spirited advocate for the benefits which the Society is seeking to deliver. I personally was present at one of those meetings, and I know some of them weren't easy. You've freely and generously given your expertise to the Society, your consummate ability to host debates on a wide variety of issues, to give lectures about the work of the Society and the collections, and you work it into everything you say to us, as well as to participate in debates and consultations about key heritage issues, has been welcomed, cherished by the Fellowship and by wider audiences. It has been a privilege for the Society to be led in this manner by someone with such a wide range of abilities and interests. Above all, you've led the Society with a keen sense of the value of the past for the present day, a commitment to the tradition of global heritage, and with exemplary standards of scholarship. We give you much thanks for that. And we would like to present you today with a gift from the Society in recognition of the leadership and the devotion to our cause that you've shown so signally. So I'd like to invite our President-elect to present this gift to you.
Maurice, I'm aware that I have many exciting challenges ahead. I think the most daunting challenge I face is undoubtedly following in your footsteps. You have been an inspirational president, I think we're all agreed, and it's an absolute pleasure to be presenting these gifts to you in acknowledgement of your service to the Society.
Thank you.
Be returned to the President for his address, and that he be requested to allow it to be published.
I agree. Thank you. Thank you very much for those warm words. I'm deeply touched by all that, and it is has to be said with full genuine feelings that nothing of anything I've achieved here would have been possible without the support of my fellow officers, the fellows of the Society, and most importantly, for their day-to-day work, their imagination and creativity by all the staff who pass through these walls. They've all been tremendous. I look forward to coming and losing myself in the library for a day, which of course I did for many, many, many years, as many of you in this room did as scholars, and not have to go to meetings and things like that. But things move on. I'm now president of the Society of Architectural Historians. Nothing like the same level of commitment as here, but I hope I can bring to that very, very enterprising and wonderful young committee of scholars something of what I've learned here, and I have learned things here in the last 7 years as director and president that none of my university tasks quite prepared me for, trained me for, or really gave me any experience of. So I'm deeply grateful for that life experience. Thank you all so much. I give notice that the next ordinary meeting will be on Thursday the 8th of May 2014, when there will be a ballot, and we shall hear a paper by Aidan Dodson, our fellow, on Shelters for Eternity, recording ancient Egyptian coffins in British and foreign collections. There follows the anniversary reception. The format is as last year. Refreshments will be in the hall and council room, and there will be a display in the library on the antiquary Peter Prattington, whose substantial collections of papers, books and drawings on Worcestershire and curiosities and cabinet in which he kept them were bequeathed to the Society in 1840. Fellows and their guests are asked not to take food and drink, back to the housekeeping here, food and drink up the stairs into the library. The reception will finish about 8 o'clock, at 8 o'clock, and the exhibition will close at 7:45. If you need to see Yola about your attendance at the reception, please do so. The anniversary meeting stands adjourned. Thank you very much.